How's it going, everybody? So in this video, we're going to be discussing evidence-based principles for improving your health using exercise. So using an evidence-based approach to improving your health with exercise, we are looking at objective markers that we can measure at baseline before exercise programs begin, and we can continue to monitor over the weeks and months that you are engaging in an exercise program so we can gauge your progress. In regards to health, we're talking about preventing disease, reversing disease, and really using exercise and nutrition and lifestyle as a means to modify health markers such as insulin sensitivity, hemoglobin A1C, HDL cholesterol, or lipoprotein. It's not really technically cholesterol, as well as things like hip circumference ratio, body fat percentage, and to some degree BMI, but I'm really more of a fan of body fat percentage and hip circumference ratio. So using blood markers from your doctor, and that's very important to get regular checkups. And for me, I'm a really big fan of checking average blood pressure over time and how that's trending, as well as hemoglobin A1C and insulin sensitivity for things like insulin resistance and just your overall metabolic health. And using HDL as a proxy as well for how generally healthy you are. Okay. Combining that with body fat percentage and also how well you're progressing on using your training modalities. So strength training is very important. It should be the foundation. We're going to be explaining why here in a bit. But as well as your cardiovascular fitness, your mile times on your runs, or whatever modality you might be using, we want to make sure that you are improving on objective health markers. Okay, so using your regular blood tests at your doctor's office, your hip circumference, your body fat percentage, and then your strength on your resistance training. Are you increasing your reps over time? Are you increasing your work capacity, just meaning your ability to do more sets and exercises for a longer duration of time without being overwhelmingly exhausted? Are you able to, are you running longer, running faster miles? Or whatever, if you're doing, you could do concept 2 rower for cardiovascular exercise. You could do burpees. I like doing as many burpees as possible in 2 minutes. And that sounds really intense, but you'd be surprised how many people of different backgrounds and age groups I've gotten to really enjoy burpees. So as long as these things are trending in a more positive and improved direction, this is the best way to tell that your exercise program and to a certain degree your nutrition is working for you. Okay, so let's talk about strength training. Okay, so for general health, strength training should be the foundation. Okay, so for everything, so first and foremost, when we're talking about longevity, okay, strength training is number one. So one of the leading causes of death, and some experts claim the leading cause of death past the age of 65, is actually hip fractures and complications once you're hospitalized from like falling and fracturing bones and hips and things of that nature. So things like heart failure and heart complications, pneumonia, these things can happen to people when they're hospitalized after falling and fracturing bones. Okay, these are actually the primary thing that we want to focus on preventing. Especially for elderly clients. They need to become more self-sufficient. And so we want to focus on strength, on functional movement patterns. And I don't like that word functional, so to speak. But what I mean is we want them using free weights and body weight exercises lunging, squatting, hinging, overhead pressing, so a vertical press, a vertical pull, and a horizontal press and a horizontal pull as well, okay? So rows, pull-ups or assisted pull-ups, lat pull-downs, inverted rows using TRX, using cables, chest presses, push-ups and push-up variations, deadlifts, bridges, glute bridges, all sorts of squats, goblet squats, front squats, back squats, barbell squats, kettlebell squats, box squats, step-ups, split squats, like you name it. We want to be using variations of so-called functional movement patterns, okay? And this is for general health, right? So I don't want to go too deep into that because the word functional gets a lot of heat, but most people know what I mean, and I think we should agree that this should be the primary focus, especially for general health and longevity as well, okay? And now, using these movements, we can modify them for so many different populations. All right, so somebody who is elderly, and they're new to exercise. So, just because you're old does not mean that you're going to be dysfunctional or something. I've trained so many clients who, after just a couple of weeks, we had barbell back squatting, and I'm talking clients in their 60s and 70s, as crazy as it sounds to some people. Barbell back squatting, goblet squatting with dumbbells, dumbbell lunging, all sorts of things, right? But for a lot of them, it's better to start with more basic exercises. So, for example, most people when they first start, if they have never touched a barbell before, are not going to be able to barbell back squat. So I usually will start with something like a body weight box squat, and then we can start to use dumbbells in order to overload that pattern and make it more challenging, as like a goblet squat, putting a dumbbell here and then squatting to a box, and then you remove the box, then you add a pause and a slow eccentric, and so you just progress the exercise, and eventually you can get them to do barbell back squats. However, you don't need to use barbells, but if you have a good trainer who knows how to coach the barbell lifts, most populations of people are going to get to a point where they're in such great shape and they're so strong, they're so functional, and they're so confident in their ability to lift weights and to move in these patterns that they're going to need more weight than dumbbells and these other modalities offer them, okay? And that's mostly true for things like squats and deadlifts, which play a fundamental role in strength training for health, wellness, and disease prevention. Okay, so anyway, the big reason why strength training is so important to prevent hip fractures and things like that, first and foremost, falling is a side effect of what's known as a lack of proprioception, which is basically your nervous system's ability to move your body through space. So basically a lack of balance, a lack of stability, and a lack of so-called functional strength, okay? Your body's ability to catch itself and stabilize itself when it's, going down stairs or something like that, stepping up a curb or something, on the street. Things like that, little things like that, believe it or not, strength training, and in particular, unilateral exercises like single leg, like lunges, single leg lunge with a balance or something like that, or single leg step ups with a balance, or just weighted step ups. These things can actually train all populations to help to prevent falling as they get older. So anyway, so preventing falling through increasing your so-called functional strength or your body awareness or your proprioception is very important, and that's like one of the big things. Increasing mobility, and mobility, the best way to increase mobility. So mobility is context dependent. Mobility is dependent upon the specific movement pattern in which you're trying to improve mobility for. So if you are trying to improve your mobility for everyday life, What does that entail? Walking around the grocery store, carrying groceries and stuff like that, maybe picking up objects off the ground, sitting on the couch and on the toilet and getting up out of bed and getting up off the ground maybe, right? Most people, it's getting up and off of chairs, basically squatting. and might I add, most movement patterns in so-called functional life are not symmetrical. They are kind of like, getting into your car. You're using one side of your body more and differently than the other. This whole idea that you need complete perfection in your physique and in your posture is not entirely correct. It's not accurate, it's not realistic, and it's not supported by evidence. But what is supported by evidence is compound movements being absolutely foundational for improving well-being and functioning throughout the lifespan in a healthy way and being independent into your old age. So anyway, beyond that, we need to improve bone mineral density and improve strength. So another thing is grip strength is one of the leading predictors of longevity, as well as muscle mass, or they say muscle tone, but really muscle mass, strength, and bone mineral density. Like, these are the things. So if severe falling past the age of 65 and complications from hip fractures are primary cause of death past the age of 65, and if muscle tone, grip strength, and muscle tone and grip strength are primary indicators of health and longevity into old age, what does that tell us about strength training? It means that strength training is a life-saving modality for longevity, and also a higher protein intake. And we'll talk about that at the end of the video, nutrition for general health and wellness, okay? So we need strength training to improve the human body's ability to endure all of the encounters we may see in everyday life. So the stronger you get in squats, deadlifts, overhead presses, horizontal presses, rows, pull downs, pull ups, step ups, all of these things, step downs, lunges, the more mobile our hips are going to be for all factors, and the stronger we're going to be in these different movement patterns. Another thing, full range of motion is extremely important, and being strong and mobile in those full range of motion movements. So again, mobility is specific to the modalities involved in which we need mobility for. Squats. Full range of motion squats are the best way to prevent injury as you get older, the best way to improve posture and strength and mobility in the hips and in the thoracic spine and the lower spine and the core. And so there's like a stigma against full range of motion training for some reason, and there's a stigma against barbell training and strength training. We're going to really keep debunking these myths here in a bit, but the big thing is if you have pain from strength training, especially full range of motion squats, or if after 4 weeks you've been working with a trainer and you're not able to do full range of motion squats, then your trainer simply does not know how to coach these movements properly or teach these movements properly. I have taught elderly individuals in their 70s, sit-down professionals like counselors in their 40s and 50s with desk jobs, back pain, hip pain, and recent injuries, MCL tears and a severed femur. I taught him how to squat, hinge, deadlift, overhead press, and eventually barbell squat 185 pound for sets of 5. Like, you would not believe the variety of people that I've taught how to squat, especially using a barbell. There's nothing inherently dangerous about barbell training as long as you know how to teach these things to the average person. And that's key. And I think the stigma against these modalities and the fear of barbell training actually sets people up for more pain and injury. And a lot of these kind of workarounds that people have to try to prevent injury can actually cause injury. For example, forcing your toes forward on a squat can prevent the hips from opening and proper tracking of the knees and hips, which can actually cause the lower back to compensate and cause pain and overuse in the lower back. And knee pain as well, just as an example. So anyway, increasing bone mineral density, increasing muscle mass over time. These are the two primary things that we need to focus on for improving general health. So we've already talked about self-sufficiency, improving bone mineral density combined with a high protein diet, adequate amounts of calcium and fat soluble nutrients, and using a DEXA scan or something like that to track bone mineral density over time. That's very important. Making sure you're working on progressive loading, which just means you are generally trending your client or generally trending in a direction of more reps, more sets, more weight over time. This is going to get you stronger. It's going to improve so basically your entire body, your connective tissue, your bones, your ligaments, your nervous system, all the systems involved in stability and balance. They're being stressed during strength training, and they're being forced to adapt. So if you want stronger knees, stronger ligaments, connective tissue, bones, more balance and stability over time, you need to be increasing your strength using basic free weight and free motion exercises. That's key. And lifting heavy is relative to the individual. Okay, for me, squatting sets of 5 with 275 pounds is really like a warm up. But for a lot of people, they see me loading up 3 plates on the bar and squatting and then doing pauses, and they are like terrified, and they're like, "Oh, you're going to hurt yourself." I could never do that in a million years, because to a lot of people, that's beyond their 1 rep max. But as your body adapts, you're able to endure heavier and heavier weight over time. So anyway, the other thing is insulin sensitivity and blood sugar. So one of the primary things we want to work on, so muscle mass. The more muscle mass you have, the more insulin sensitive you're going to be, due to the muscles kind of partitioning more glucose and glycogen towards refueling and functioning of the muscles. Okay, so contracting muscles and just storing glucose and glucose like compounds is relying upon more muscle mass. The more muscle mass you have, the more insulin sensitive you're going to be. The more effectively your body is going to be able to utilize carbohydrates, glucose, and glycogen. Okay, and one of the leading indicators of insulin sensitivity is muscle mass to fat mass ratio over time. Not to mention, the more you do, so resistance training in and of itself, if done in the right sets, reps, volume, and rest periods, has unique effects and benefits on impacting blood sugar levels both in the short term and the long term over time. The other thing is, the more lean muscle mass you carry, the higher your basal metabolic rate, and that means the more calories you burn at rest. The more calories you burn at rest, the more calories you're burning over time, the more food you're able to eat without suffering negative consequences, which means a benefit on keeping your body fat levels down. Higher basal metabolic rate means it's easier to basically keep your body fat off, if we're putting it simply. And that's important for general health because body fat percentage and waist circumference are two of the leading indicators, along with hemoglobin A1C and fasting insulin, to determine your metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, and your level of insulin sensitivity over time. So somebody who wants to prevent heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and all sorts of kind of chronic diseases, and even things like respiratory diseases, infectious diseases. You all know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say a specific name so I don't get like shadow banned or whatever. But basically, improving your muscle mass, it plays a key role in staying lean and keeping that metabolic health on check, okay? So HDL, blood levels of high-density lipoprotein, hemoglobin A1C, even LDL to a certain degree, as well as blood pressure. A lot of these things will improve just as a result of losing overall body mass, but that's a more deeper kind of thing to get into. But lower body fat percentage, lower waist circumference, and higher muscle mass is going to improve all of these things over time, okay? And we haven't even gotten into cardiovascular fitness yet. But as you can see, strength training, muscle mass, higher protein intake, these are things that are going to impact your most important objective markers of health over time. Bone mineral density, your strength levels, your mobility, even things like shoulder mobility, posture. These things will improve with strength training. And you don't have to do specific corrective exercises to improve posture, or to, and most of those things you're not loading with enough weight to get a stimulus on the bone. It's more with corrective exercises, if you all know what I'm talking about, like bird dogs and things of that nature, banded exercises. But just using basic free weight, so-called functional patterns, will help with those things over time, okay? So chronic back pain, shoulder pain, and things like that, the evidence-based approach would be the biopsychosocial model of pain, and basically how you approach chronic pain, which I've done. A lot of trainers and coaches and PhD exercise physiologists in the evidence-based community, they will recommend against stretching, and specifically only recommend strength training through full range of motion to improve pain. I use a combination of stretching, of body weight exercises during the warm-up, and full range of motion strength training to help to remedy pain over time. And it all depends on the client as well, and it depends on where the pain might be coming from, and is it just generic pain, or is it actually coming from a true structural damage? Like, for example, herniated discs are a kind of gray area, and that's something I can talk about in a specific video on pain. But if we're talking fractures, if we're talking sprains, if we're talking we see swelling and bruising and tears of a muscle or a ligament, that is cause for concern. But for people with things just like general back pain, knee pain, and things like that, and they've been cleared by their doctor, they've had x-rays, nothing real is going on, a lot of times what people generally need is stretching. They need dynamic movement through full ranges of motion. That is the main area where yoga can come in, but I use yoga personally for warm-ups and things like that, and basic mobility and cool downs. But for actual training and mobility, we use strength training through a full range of motion. But progressive loading, using pain as your guide. We load to tolerance, and we use range of motion to tolerance. So we'll do functional movements like squats and deadlifts and overhead presses, but we modify them to only be utilized in a way that does not cause pain. So for example, I had a client who had glute pain, chronic glute pain or hip pain, and they could only squat to parallel. Anything lower, they had the range of motion to do, like the mobility to be able to go lower in the squat, but it would cause some pain in their glute. And so we would use box squats, and we would progressively add weight and reps using box squats to load that range of motion, and we'd progressively lower the box so that they're getting deeper and deeper over time, and we're progressively increasing their body's tolerance to be able to squat with heavier weights and larger range of motion over time until they can go full range of motion with no pain. Okay. A lot of people, they just try to keep weights light and use machines and this and that without actually improving the client. They're just slapping a Band-Aid on them and not making them any better. They're almost enabling their dysfunction, and that is not what a good personal trainer should do, or a good coach or a good physiotherapist. Most trainers and coaches and whatnot, they don't actually study the science of this. They don't follow evidence-based coaches like I do. They don't work alongside them. I've been working alongside a lot of evidence-based physiotherapists for a long time. And this is what you should be doing, progressively increasing the range of motion and progressively loading them to tolerance. But if pain goes over like a 5 out of a 10 during a session, that's when you need to kind of cut things back a little bit, lower the weight, lower the range of motion, modify the exercise, make it easier. Loading the tolerance, progressing the range of motion over time, and progressively improving mobility using full range of motion, strength training, as well as yoga, mobility, stretching, foam rolling to a certain degree, and education on pain, nocebo, kinesiophobia, and principles of the biopsychosocial model of pain and health. All right, so more muscle mass means more insulin sensitivity, etc. More muscle mass means easier to maintain, lower body fat percentage. What else are we looking at here? Bone mineral density. So cardiovascular fitness is extremely important. I think it's a good idea to try to start off. So to pay attention to your mile times, teaching people how to run pain-free over time, and helping them progressively become more and more able to run at least 2 miles without pain and total exhaustion. But 1 mile is a good kind of benchmark. Running 1 mile and starting people off to where they can run an entire mile, in under 12 minutes at least, and not be totally exhausted or sore or wiped out for a couple of days. A lot of people, they can not even run; they can just jog, right? Which is, a lot of people are kind of like, there's stigma against running. People think running just destroys people's knees. The fact is, the body is so specific adaptation to imposed demands. Running might hurt your knees the first 2 to 4 weeks of running, but over time, your knees should adapt. Your lower back should adapt. Your body should adapt. And there's a whole lot of different kind of, form rules that people try to put into place, and all sorts of biomechanical experts and things. And they all have different methods of running and different techniques, and certain things are good, some things are bad, and these things. The fact of the matter is, whatever form you run using, or you squat using, or you deadlift using, or you sit using, whatever form you move through, your body aims to adapt to over time. So if you have knee pain or if you have lower back pain, and your doctor has x-rayed you and cleared you, there's no structural damage, 9 times out of 10, if it's in the first 4 weeks of you running, it's not usually a form issue. It's usually just your body needs time to adapt to the running. So if you just start off like running 1 mile out of nowhere, and you were previously not running at all, you're going to be hurting. And there's going to be a period of adaptation. The same way that if you start squatting, 5 sets of 10 using a barbell, and you've never barbell squatted before, you're going to be so sore and hurt and banged up for like a whole week after that, and it's going to take a long time for you to adapt because your baseline is sedentary, it's no running or no squatting. As long as you start slowly and work your way up over time, you're very unlikely to have knee pain or soreness or anything like that. And so it's not so much a form issue, but adapting your body slowly to the modality in question, okay? And that's very important to understand if you are new to these things and you're looking to be healthy, because one of the primary reasons why people don't do barbell squats, why people don't do strength training, why people usually just walk and jog and kind of play around on the machines and play around on the treadmills at gyms and not actually engage in it, is because they're scared of injuring themselves. And on top of that, so many trainers and coaches and experts make it overwhelmingly complicated to just start exercise. They make you think that you need to learn this very specific toe stride or heel strike when you run on the ball of the foot or whatever it is, and your posture has to be right and your breathing and whatever it is. And when you do squats, you have to have this specific posture and all this other stuff. And if your toes point out like clown feet, then you're going to be dysfunctional and injure yourself and all these things. First of all, none of those are grounded in evidence and science. Second of all it does is prevent people from being consistent, prevent people from making progress in the most basic and straightforward means possible. It just creates a irrationally, was the word, a high barrier to injury, like gatekeeping. Like, you got to be absolutely perfect with all of these complicated rules and body mechanics and things, or else you're going to injure yourself and be worse off than you would if you just didn't exercise at all. That is like such an unhealthy and toxic mentality to embed in new people, and it's not true. It's not based on evidence. It's not beneficial, okay? And this is coming from somebody that when I first started off, I believed everything that, all of these things, the certain certifications, I'm not going to name any, that make you think that those things are the most important thing. All of these things, okay? I used to believe in all of that overcomplicated stuff, and I found that it doesn't actually help anyone. Definitely didn't help me, and it just wastes a lot of people's time, money, and effort that would be better spent towards these other major things we already mentioned. We want to get stronger through full ranges of motion, increase muscle mass over time, decrease our body fat percentage over time, decrease our waist circumference ratio over time, improve insulin sensitivity over time, improve our blood pressure into the healthy range over time. We want to increase our performance on cardiovascular activity, whether that's rowing 200 meters in shorter amounts of time, squatting 200 pounds for 5 sets of 10 in 6 months, whatever the metric is you're using, it has to be objective, it has to be relevant to these specific health outcome-oriented goals that we talked about here. So notice how I didn't talk about Bosu ball squatting. I didn't talk about, correcting upper cross syndrome and these things. Now, those things, it's just because somebody has upper cross syndrome doesn't mean that they have a actual pathology, okay? A pathology implies a negative symptom like pain, discomfort, lower quality of life. The other thing is the exercises used to improve upper cross syndrome are not, like, there's so many other ways of improving someone's posture or upper cross syndrome or pain. Pain is a real thing we want to work on. Upper cross syndrome is not a problem unless someone experiences pain. And it's also a made-up kind of thing. Okay, I don't want to get too deep into that. But anyway, I'm not going to get too deep into that, okay? But Notice how I didn't mention any kind of gimmick, any kind of dogma, yoga, this and that. I don't know. Corrective exercise, core training, whatever, okay? I'm focusing on the 20% of methods that's going to yield us 80% of results. The things that actually matter, okay? There's a huge stigma against, meatheads and strength training and high protein intakes and this and that. And it's like, what is the alternative exactly? If you're not increasing your strength, your muscle mass, decreasing your fat mass, if you're not increasing performance metrics in your cardiovascular activity, and you have real health goals you're trying to achieve, then what's going on here? So anyway, the other thing is high intensity interval training and higher volume of cardiovascular activity. These are some of the biggest modalities that can improve your metabolic health: insulin sensitivity, HDL, cholesterol, hemoglobin A1C, blood pressure. And we need to modify the intensity to the individual. Using circuit training, antagonist superset training with lower rest periods, just alternating between a press and a pull, a squat and a hinge, which would maybe it's better otherwise. And just increasing the overall kind of blood flow and gut of the workout, the intensity level, in a sense of making them breathe harder, can actually just getting them working with more volumes over time, less rest periods. These exercises that do that in the literature have been shown to be some of the most effective at improving all markers of metabolic health. So I like to combine strength training, especially mostly, slower eccentric and pause training, depending on the person. But if they're not, 3-second eccentric, 3-second pause, functional movement patterns, sets of 8 up to maybe 15, depending on the person and their goals. Other people, sets of 5 to 8, depending on their goals. And combine that with high-intensity interval training of some kind. And for older individuals, we do core training as primary method of high-intensity interval training. That means things like plank ups, shoulder taps, body weight lunges and squats, TRX rows, inverted push-ups or incline push-ups, Turkish get-ups, and combining all these so-called functional body weight exercises, core exercises, stability exercises, and putting them in circuits to cover all sorts of bases. After we do the first half of the workout is progressive overload training using functional movement patterns with 1 to 2 minute rest periods in between sets to improve muscle mass and all these other things we mentioned at the beginning of the video. But to get that high intensity interval stimulus and the cardiovascular component, as well as covering stability and all these other function, smaller muscle groups and things like that, core training, stability training, you can cover all of that, putting those into circuits with lower rest periods, 20 seconds of rest or so in between after the strength training. So, yeah, and so someone who likes Bosu ball training or whatever, or whatever it is, bird dogs, corrective exercise, you can put those into circuits and get the biggest bang for your buck after the strength training, because that should be number one. Interval runs, box jumps, plyo jumps, broad jumps, single leg hops. There's all sorts of things you can do. And putting them into warm-ups, putting them into circuits after your strength training. So, yeah. So we haven't really talked about specific programming outside of these things, but yeah. We're looking at blood markers of health. We're looking at your waist circumference ratio, your body fat percentage ratio, lean muscle tissue over time, we're looking at bone mineral density. We're looking at how is your balance progressing. How is your and form and mobility are the same. They're not the same thing, but they're one and the same. They're both a product of the same thing. The more you practice a movement pattern, the better your mobility gets, the better your strength gets, the better your posture and form gets in that movement pattern over time. Okay? So I like to, so my warm-ups, my mobility, of course there's general warm-ups and mobility before training, but for each movement, if we're warming up for squats, we warm up with body weight squats first, using the perimeters of the workout, the reps, the sets, the tempo, and then we slowly add weight and we ramp the weight up until we get to our working sets with an aim for a certain RPE, rating of perceived exertion. An RPE 8 means that after the modality is over, you ask the client, hey, how did that feel on a scale from 1 to 10? How heavy and challenging was it? Just give me a ballpark estimate off the top of your head. And they'll be like, it felt like a 7. Like, okay, a 7, maybe we can add a little bit more weight, but it'll probably turn to an 8 on the next set regardless. You know what I mean? If it's a 6, we add weight. If it's like, oh man, that was like a 9 or a 10, usually you could tell, oh man, they almost died on that last one. You lower the weight, right? And so that's how warm-ups kind of progressively incur inside the training session. So anyway, overall, if you do strength training right, you will get a conditioning effect from it as well. You will get improved resting heart rate. You'll get improved work capacity, cardiovascular conditioning component. You will get increased bone mineral density, increased muscle mass, increase in your blood glucose response and insulin sensitivity in the short term from the training session as well as the long term. And then you just add the cardiovascular component after that, and you can mesh in whatever other kind of modalities you have not ticked off. And that's a good way to have a little bit of everything in one session, okay? Now, just so everyone knows, if you have type 2 diabetes that you're trying to reverse, there are specific modalities that you want to employ, specific ways of using these things that we talked about to make it more effective. Somebody who is relatively healthy and athletic and they're just training for general health and well-being, they're going to need a different set and rep range and have different progression goals than someone who has type 2 diabetes and is obese or overweight. They're still going to do all of the same things we talked about. They're going to have the basic mobility and flexibility, and it's going to be heavily modified to their current state of fitness. They're still going to do squats, deadlifts, overhead press, but you're going to have to modify it. Can they sit on the ground? Can they do these exercises standing without risk of falling and injuring themselves? Cutting the range of motion for them, changing the sets and reps. Someone with type 2 diabetes and who might be obese or overweight might be better off with a higher overall volume of training and slowly progressing the intensity over time to where you have shorter rest periods, and you can do circuits. And again, I like antagonist supersets with lower rest periods with higher reps for obese and type 2 diabetes clients, because not only has that been shown to be the most beneficial in the literature for insulin sensitivity, but also, what are sets of 5 to 8 going to be with heavier weights and barbell squats and things like that going to be doing for someone who's obese and has type 2 diabetes? I mean, those things are beneficial, but they need a cardiovascular component, and it's harder to get the higher intensity cardiovascular activity done through running when you're overweight and type 2 diabetic, especially if you're overweight. Like training obese individuals, it's not realistic because of the overall stress on their joints to have them try to run and do high intensity interval training like burpees and stuff like that if they're obese. And they actually get a better cardiovascular stimulus and better impact on their blood markers of health over time by getting a high-intensity interval training effect from using cable machines, dumbbells, machines, and weights. And machines will actually not be a bad idea for people who have trouble getting up off the ground and who might be 400 pounds, for example. Same thing if you have like an elderly individual who has a lot of injuries and might be disabled. It's hard to get them to do the high-intensity interval, the cardiovascular component by running and stuff if they're walking around on a cane. But if you're able to assist them and find variations of maybe box squats, maybe, cable machines, dumbbells, or if they just can't do squats and lunges or anything of that nature, or hinges, using machines in that case, I get really creative with my injured clients and disabled clients. Modifying the reps and sets in a way that gives them a cardiovascular stimulus is important. For people who are already generally healthy, though, and their main goal is increased muscle mass, staying lean, looking better, looking more attractive, as well as disease prevention, injury prevention, and stuff like that, I do believe in that case, for these healthy individuals who just want to become healthier, even healthier than they already are, improve their muscle mass, all these things, those are the people who should be following a primarily barbell exercise focused program. They need to be lifting relatively heavy, up to about maybe 2 reps in reserve, sets of 4 to 10 reps, give or take. I would say 4 to 8 reps on barbell exercises, working up to an RP8 with relatively higher volume. So 3 sets of 5, about 3 times a week on every major muscle group, I think is a good kind of protocol to use. Progressively adding reps, adding weight over time, getting stronger, lifting more reps over time is the best thing. It will definitely put more muscle mass on them. It'll make them stronger, increase their bone mineral density. It'll prolong their mobility as they get older, and at the moment, it'll help them relieve pain. That's the most effective way to improve body composition, and it is the most motivational thing for most people. Obviously, using dumbbells and cables on accessories. Most people will be more than happy to do that, keeping it basic, and seeing that progress on the reps, on the weights, on their in the mirror, noticing that they can get away with more donuts or pizzas on the weekend and not even notice any increase in their body fat on Mondays. Those things are very possible if you train this way. And so, for other people, you can use dumbbells and things, but you'll get to a point where you're going to have to do a lot more reps to, especially like deadlifts. Like I can deadlift 100-pound dumbbells for like sets of 40 because my barbell deadlift is close to 500 right now. And if you have a good trainer, he's going to get you to a 400-pound deadlift within 6 months. So anyway, yeah, changing. So the same overall principles apply, but the exercise variations and the modalities, the way you use these principles, the reps, the sets, the volume, all these things are going, and the variations of the training is going to depend on the individual. Overall health using training principles is highly dependent on where you are currently. Okay, and we're talking YouTube right now. Okay, so like I'm talking to my YouTube people right now. Most people on YouTube in the YouTube health communities, completely different than like at local gyms and stuff. Okay, most of these people they're heavily involved in extremely complicated communities of health that have really outlandish ideas on what it means to be healthy that have nothing to do with actual disease prevention, feeling good, and feeling capable to attack life's obstacles. Most people are really focused on like detoxing cellular toxins and eating a diet that's spiritually appropriate to transcend the kundalini. And for people who don't know what I'm talking about, you would be surprised the crazy stuff that you hear on YouTube. And I used to believe in it when I first got into the health and nutrition side of things back in 2013, 2014. Okay. People who are looking into disease prevention on the internet communities, they go in complete opposite direction than what actually matters. And nutrition is going to be kind of where a lot of these gray areas exist, and I'll talk about that in a separate video. But a lot of people, they don't look at muscle mass as healthy. They don't think about strength training as healthy. They think you need to run long distances and look like a string bean and do cardio all the time and this and that. And they think more muscle mass means like it's harder on the heart and all this other stuff. And it's like, man, I will beat most people in races that think that way easily and do it after a heavy squat session because my body is so durable and adapted to heavy demands on all fronts. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep in that, but yeah, so from a kind of like exercise perspective, these are things we're looking at, okay? Now, there's other things. Like for me personally, my own opinion is I think your ability to function on low sleep and under stress is also a reflection of your overall health. Because I've noticed the more and more I've had my nutrition, my supplementation, which is mostly herbs at this point, and electrolytes, and my exercise, the more I got these things on check, and the healthier I felt overall, the easier and easier it's been for me to to live life and function on a very high level and with low stimulants, on low sleep. That's something a lot of people don't look at, And like, for example, I many times due to my research schedule and my school schedule and all the other things I have going on, there are some times where I'd only sleep 3 hours, sometimes not sleep at all, sometimes because of noises and stuff in the background when I'm trying to sleep waking me up. And I'll go and I'll train clients or whatever, do jiu-jitsu. And then I'll tell people, hey, sorry if I'm not making sense when I talk. I'm running on 3 hours of sleep. People all the time are like, wow, I can't even tell. To me, you look like you're doing just like you're operating perfectly fine. But most people, they're like dragging. It's like it's very noticeable that they are low sleep. But anyway, that's a subjective measure of health that, whatever. So if you get these things on check, I'm confident that you'll be steered in the right direction. Don't be persuaded by Nadia Aguilar and the modality known as functional patterns. Don't be swayed by a lot of these so-called functional expert gurus who want you doing these crazy banded exercises on Bosu balls and all this other, Joel Seedman and stuff like that. The basics are number one. It doesn't matter what your goal is. If we're talking general health, disease prevention, reversal of diabetes, injury prevention, rehabbing injuries, sports performance, all of these things function on the same principles, but you just use them differently, okay? Adapting your body to force over time produces stronger, healthier bodies. No matter how you look at it, your body's efficiency at processing glucose depends on its ability to endure. You can think of it as the more of a demand for glucose you put your body through, the more sensitive it becomes to it over time. So yeah, so that's all the, hopefully this shit made sense. I think it's a bit scattered maybe, but I'm sure that's just how it sounds in my head, and it probably came out perfect. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know what you got from this video. Let me know what y'all think is important for health that I leave something out. And if you have any questions about any of the things I discussed in this video, post them down below, and I will talk to you in the next video.